Professor Lucas, we've been talking today a lot about ways that we can improve infant nutrition, especially in early life. And certainly one of the approaches that we've taken scientifically and nutritionally is using breast milk as a model. In what ways have we, in what ways do you think we should use breast milk, and how has it served as a model for defining what is the best approach for nutrition in early life?
Yes, that's a very good question. You would think that if we looked at what was in breast milk, it would tell us what we need to feed babies in infancy. For instance, the design of special feeds for babies who are sick. We'd get a feel for what is normal nutrition. Now, actually, there were, by the 1960s, 1,500 publications on the composition of breast milk. But despite all that work, it really didn't give us an accurate view of the dietary intake of the breastfed baby, which is what we really wanted to know. The reason for that, actually, is that one of the main components of breast milk, the fat, which determines how many calories there are in breast milk, is extremely variable during the course of a feed, and the baby will often leave high-fat hind milk behind in the breast after a feed. So it's very difficult for us to take samples of breast milk that would represent what the baby actually consumes. So, for instance, this express breast milk might misestimate the amount of fat and energy quite substantially if the baby were to leave high-fat hind milk in the breast at the end of the feed. And we decided to look at this a long time ago in some really quite unusual ways. For instance, we measured milk flow and milk composition continuously during a breastfeed by using a special shield worn over the breast that had a way of measuring flow and milk composition. And we worked out that previous estimates of the amount of fat in breast milk obtained by expressing milk into a pot gave us something like a 60% error. So we were worried about that. We used even more sophisticated techniques which confirmed our results. So now we're getting a better feel for what is the dietary intake of a breastfed baby. Now, you would think that this wasn't that critical, but it is, because, for instance, infant formulas in the past were modeled on what people thought was in breast milk, and since that was overestimated, infant formula, to start with, had too much energy and protein in it. We then did research on that and found that that drove faster growth in formula-fed babies, which put them at risk for having obesity in later life. Now we have better data on what the dietary intake of a breastfed baby is, and that's a better model for all sorts of purposes, including making better infant formulas.
Thank you. I think in many ways, from what you just said, we are learning, especially as it relates to understanding better what the current or the ideal ways to prepare breast milk substitutes are. More importantly, though, is what are the clinical outcomes? What are the clinical benefits that we can or should expect? One, from more and longer breastfeeding, and two, from any kind of substitute that better approaches the functional effects via the composition of infant products.
Yeah, of course, it's impossible to mimic breast milk in an artificial product, because breast milk has so many components that are essentially unmimicable, like, for instance, live cells and very complex array of substances that would be very difficult to capture. And breastfeeding is always going to give us a better result from the point of view of health outcomes. But having said that, it has been a slight problem actually proving the many different health effects that breastfeeding is thought to have, because these are observational studies. They're not an experiment. You can't assign babies to breastfeeding or bottle feeding randomly as you would in a clinical trial. And there are things that interfere with our interpretation of the results. For instance, if it were true that brighter mothers tend to breastfeed, that's not generally true, but it's, well, it is generally true, but it's not specifically true for individual parents. But if that were true, then you could see how you wouldn't be able to tell if breastfed babies turned out to be brighter than formula-fed babies, whether that was due to the mother's intelligence or whether it was due to something in breast milk.
Right.
So
getting rid of bias is definitely a problem.
Yes. So what we've had to do is to think about ways in which we can test more rigorously what is and isn't benefited by breastfeeding. And one of the ways that we've done this is to look at the premature baby, because although the premature baby is quite different in some respects to a full-term baby, there are very good clinical trials, both from the past and more recently, comparing breast milk with formula, for instance. Now, these are randomized trials, so from that we can actually get at cause. And we've found, for instance, that if we look at the literature and we look at our own research, there are a large number of studies that demonstrate that infective processes are protected against by using human milk in the care of premature babies compared to formula. So that makes us trust the data in full-term infants much more, because although it's not perfect because it's not a randomized trial, we're getting exactly the same findings in premature babies. And then we can run through all the other different outcomes like allergy and brain development and IQ and so forth. And there are quite a number of strict experimental studies in premature babies that actually give us the answer. And so when we look again at the full-term infant, we find this very much more convincing. So we now appreciate that a lot of things that are shown to be related to breastfeeding are almost certainly actually caused by breastfeeding, and that's very good for health promotion. This is going to be important for organizations like WHO and government departments in the global promotion of breastfeeding.
Right. Well, all the more to say that the more emphasis we place on early life nutrition and the way that we manage nutrition, particularly in high-risk population of premature babies, can give us great return on the investment that we are making today.
Absolutely. I think that this is a critical period. I've devoted much of my research career to looking at the impact of nutrition in early life on long-term health. I've called this process programming, the idea that you can be programmed by your early nutrition for the diseases you get in later life. This has been well known for at least 80 years in animals, but we did some of the first studies, randomized trials, to show that this was true for humans. And the exciting thing is that relatively brief critical periods in early life can be used for us to intervene to totally change population health in the long term. So it's a very, not only an important time to focus on, it's actually economically sensible, because it's a period of time that doesn't require very much resource. So it's actually relevant to developing countries as well as developed ones.
Lots been done, lots to learn. Thank you very much, Dr. Lucas.
Thank you.